I'm Alex Cack. I'm joined today by author Madeleine Roux, and as well as the street performer outside of her home.
Yep, apologies. He's coming with me today, I guess.
None taken. We are here to plug that man. I've been starting all of these off lately by asking people how they're doing and checking in on them, making sure they're okay. So how are you doing? Are you okay?
I've actually been like ill with a mystery sickness this whole quarantine, which has been wild. So I was just back at the hospital today for more blood draws. I'm not sure I have any left in my veins. But I got tested for COVID last week actually, and negative, which is good. But yeah, so that's been crazy because like everybody's like, oh, I'm taking up new hobbies. I'm doing this. I'm being so productive. And I'm like, I'm not. I'm just trying to rest and, and get as much done as I can. But yeah, it's been weird to sort of be going to ground zero of the whole thing like this whole time. You know what I mean? I think people are so afraid of the hospital, and I've been there like 4 or 5 times now in the last 2 weeks. So
Yeah,
it's
I would be
crazy. But
terrified to go. I'm like scared to go to the dentist right now. Like I have fillings I
yeah.
need to get taken care of. We're putting them off.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it's so locked down. Like, there's all these checkpoints, and it's great. I mean, it's really empty actually because you have to have a very good reason to be there. So every time I've gone, it's in and out really fast, really efficient, and I actually haven't really seen any other patients. It's really just, yeah, they do everything through telemedicine as much as they can, and then, but yeah, for obviously tests and blood work and stuff, I've had to go in. So it's pretty spooky, but
So it's got to be the worst possible time to get sick. I mean, I had a panic attack like the first week of quarantine, like a month ago. I like came down with a cold for like
mm-hmm.
5 days,
Mm-hmm.
and I was panicked. I
Yeah.
mean, in a blind panic, like locked myself in my bedroom. I couldn't imagine having something serious during this.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, that they wanted to test for it finally because of the timing. They were like, well, this started, like the week before we all went into lockdown here in Seattle, so we might as well check. But yeah, so, and obviously there's a lot of like false negatives and stuff, so I could have it, but I don't think I do. I haven't had a cough or a fever or anything. So it was more just a precaution.
And so you're in Seattle currently.
Yeah, we've been doing this for a long time now. I feel like we're getting pretty pro. Yeah, I mean, I'm really proud of the response here. They took it seriously really right away, and everyone started social distancing pretty much the minute stuff started to happen. So yeah, I feel like we're on week like 4 or 5 at this point. I don't know. Time has no meaning anymore. So
It really is. It's insane how much it's all blending together, and just what a fucking mess. Like I think trying to keep track of anything really is. You are a writer by trade.
I am, yes.
Um, how does something like this impact writers? I mean, are you already working from home most of the time, or do you go out in public to be productive, to be creative?
It really depends. I mean, this hasn't been a huge shift for me. I work from home anyway. Some days I'll go to the coffee shop or whatever. Obviously, that's not a possibility anymore. But so yeah, I felt pretty like primed to deal with this. I'm a homebody anyway, and yeah, I'm used to just working from my desk every day. But it's hard. I think a lot of people, I'm getting a lot of questions on Twitter and Instagram that's like, oh, like you're a writer in quarantine, like give me the tips. And I'm like, I don't know, I've never done it this way, and most writers I talk to are really pretty paralyzed by anxiety and worries, and a lot of people I know are writing contemporary novels. Sorry, my dogs are having a little hoedown in the background. But
No, let them hoe down,
yeah,
please.
they'll show up. They'll probably show up on the couch eventually. But oh yeah, there we go.
There we go.
But yeah, it's like, they're writing contemporary novels and they're like, do I mention this? Like, what does it look like to have a book that's set now that's going to come out in 2 years? It's like there's all these questions surrounding how do you sort of integrate that. I have a book that I turned in December, and it's contemporary, and now I'm like, well, geez, am I gonna have to go back in edits now? You know what I mean? Like, should I mention something? Is it weird to just pretend like it never happened? Because it's going to come out after hopefully all of this is kind of wrapping up. But yeah, so it's really strange. It's strange to know how to deal with it. I think a lot of people are tempted to sort of take their experience and turn it into a novel right now, which I would caution against pretty strongly. And yeah, so we're all just trying to navigate it, the best way possible. I've been forcing myself to work. I think I've been setting some pretty strict, like from this time to this time, it's just work. So at least I get a little something done every day. But yeah, I think it's challenging. I don't think any of us really know, how to mentally be creative, how to put yourself in a creative space when so much of your brain power is sort of taken up with just like worries and, legitimate fears and concerns. So, yeah, I don't know. I think all of us are struggling in different ways, even those of us who kind of just like sit at our desk at home all day anyway. It's still different in some way.
Well, and people, I think one thing that really should be communicated through this is like it's okay to take a break.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
And I feel like that is not the narrative that's been pushed, and especially for like creatives and people in creative lines at work. It's like, bring us a masterpiece,
Yeah, and it's hard to sort of explain how it's like, on a good day, I can write like when I'm healthy and not in, a pandemic, I can write like 10,000 words in a good day. I've been averaging maybe 1,000, maybe two a day, like I'm trying to forgive myself, and I think everybody should do that. Like just try to be understanding of your mind and body might not be fully present right now for like quality creative work. So, it's okay to sort of step back and just take care of yourself and whoever you're in quarantine with. Yeah, I'm kind of ignoring that pressure. It's like I put out so much work anyway. I'm just sort of like, you know what? Maybe this is the time to slow down for a minute. So
I wanted to touch back to something you said earlier that I thought was interesting. Where you were talking about cautioning against people writing novels based on this experience. How often does that happen to you though? Where like some random person pitches you like, "This is my idea for a book," and how do you react to that?
I have a pretty fine-tuned like radar now for. That's great. Sorry, he found his cow. Sorry, bud. You can have it back. Yeah, so like on airplanes and stuff, when people ask what I do, I kind of lie or downplay it because I've 100% learned now that if you want for the rest of the flight to hear this person's brilliant story idea, but I also sort of like I have lines now to cut them off. You're like, oh, well, I can't like take that, you'll sue me. So like I can't. I'm not gonna. I don't want to hear it. Don't tell me. La 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 la. So yeah, I mean, I think everybody really wants to take this experience and make it count for something. I think there's a sense of like, oh, this is going to be like lost time or something, which is nonsense. And I talked to a lot of agents and stuff, and they're all like, please, please, please don't write your quarantine novel about being in quarantine. Like, we don't want to get 8,000 of those, like there's kind of like everybody has the same idea right now, right? So like, if you are trying to be creative in quarantine and you are trying to write your novel in quarantine, I would say do the opposite. Like, you know what I mean? Like, take yourself somewhere else. I think it'll be healthier for you mentally, and also you'll have a better chance of actually getting that published because no one will want to read like 9,000 fictionalized versions of this, next year. I think we're all going to want a break from it. So that would be my advice. But yeah, I do get a lot of like, oh yeah, I had this great idea for a book. I'm like, cool, you should write that. I'm not going to write that. So
I do love that like desire to like pass things off. Like doing comedy, people would always be like, "Oh, well, here's a great joke for you," you know, or here's a
Yep.
funny story about my Uncle Frank. Why don't you tell that on
Sure.
stage? Like, I don't know your fucking Uncle Frank, man. Like,
Right. Like, yeah, like whatever flavor or whatever context this has for you is what makes it funny, right? So like the same thing with novels, like, I'm also terrible at like elevator pitching my books. So, I don't even, whenever anybody's like, "Oh, what's your book about?" I'm like, "Oh, Jesus Christ." Like, I don't know how to sum this up in a few sentences. So, yeah, so I definitely have experienced that. And I think it's like, it's nice. It's like people are trying to connect, right? They're trying to be like, "Oh, like, I know books. I know what a book is." And you're like, "Cool. You should go
it
buy
definitely
mine."
com- it definitely comes from the sweetest place. Like, there's no ill will or malice in it, but it is always just one of those, like, it's so common that I think if you're in any type of creative pursuit, you're just like, there's an internal groan that happens.
Yeah, and I think too, I don't know I think it's probably the same if you're in comedy or any sort of like creative profession, right? Where it's like, "Oh, I could do that." And you're like, "Could you? Because you're telling me this book idea. Why don't you write it?" Like if it's so easy,
Yeah.
if it's so straightforward, right? Like you do it. So there's a little bit of that for me where I get a little like everybody thinks they're a novelist, and I think everybody could write a book, like yeah, definitely theoretically, but yeah, I try to gently remind them, like, well, I'm on 3 deadlines right now, so probably wouldn't want to write that too. Like, maybe you should try. Maybe you should, if it's such a great idea, I wouldn't want to take it. Like, that's your money that you'll make. So.
Well, and it's also, that bleeds into kind of an unrelated but interesting thing, which is the rise of successful self-publishing,
Mm-hmm.
which is fairly new, and the internet has really streamlined it. How does that kind of impact the, I don't know, for lack of a better term, marketplace for an author like yourself? I mean, how is this different now?
It doesn't really affect me because it tends to be, I mean, a lot of times what happens is you'll have sort of a fluke, right, where someone self-publishes and then it's like a runaway hit. And then what inevitably happens is they end up going to traditional publishing. So, even if they get hot as a self-published author, they tend to then get a contract with a normal publishing house. And honestly, like, I don't mind either way. I was sort of discovered on the internet. So I'm like, put your stuff out there, but it's definitely for a specific type of person. Like, I hate doing all the marketing and all the promotion and stuff like that. Like, I'm from the Midwest. Like, I hate talking about that stuff. I hate like promoting myself. I find it deeply uncomfortable. So having a publisher, it's like they know what to do. They have all the contacts. They have all the, they can get all the ads and everything. But, if you're self-publishing, it's 100% you. You're the editor. You're the researcher. You're the cover artist. You're typesetting it. You're doing everything. You're promoting it. And that's not really where I like to put my energy. So yeah, I think it's I think it's good because I think the constant conversation we're having in publishing is like, how do we make this a more democratic process? Like, how do we get more unique voices and promote them? How do we get more writers of color and queer authors out there? And I think, self-publishing is sort of the way to like have those voices out there and maybe they can be discovered, more easily. But it's hard, it's like self-publishing, there's a lot of noise. Traditional publishing, there's a lot of noise. So I think we're all just trying to like cut through and have our book seen and our book read. But yeah, no, there's no like, I don't have like beef with self-publishing or self-published authors. Like, kudos, like you're wearing every hat and I couldn't do that. So.
Let's talk about, you said you were discovered on the internet. What did that look like? I mean, what were you doing that got you discovered?
Sure. A lot of people like ask me how to do this, and I don't actually think it's very possible anymore. I think I was in a really sweet spot of like publishing had sort of discovered like memes and like my agent rep the I Can Has Cheeseburger people. So she was very on the internet sort of person. And I think now there's again so much more noise that like this was like coming up on 10 years ago. So the landscape of the internet was a little different, but I was self-publishing on just like on a blog, on like a WordPress blog, a zombie survival novel that was told like as if the blog itself was the character's blog, and I would sort of update it, a chapter every few days or whatever in real time, and then people that found it would comment and sort of like get into it, and then I would incorporate their characters, and I kept it very like, this is her, like my email was nowhere on it, like I had a fake account set up for her, I had fake social media set up for her and stuff, and my agent's brother found it after it sort of popped up on like Hajiba, I think I'm saying that wrong. It popped up on like there and Reddit and a few other places. And her brother found it and was like, hey, this is really addicting. You should take a look at it. So about half of it was up, and she reached out to me in character through the character's email, which was really cute. And I was like, this is interesting. I'm going to respond to this. And thank Christ I did. So yeah, so that was like, and then we, about half of it was finished, and so it's still up there for posterity. I never took it down, so you can see it's kind of a cute artifact. But yeah, so then we finished it. I finished the second half. We polished it up and took it to St. Martin's Macmillan, and they offered on it. So yeah, it was very like surreal and crazy. And I was like graduating college that semester, and it was great. I mean, it was exciting, but yeah, I mean, that's kind of the power of that. If you can write something that, reaches people, and then find the right places to advertise it and sort of find your click, I think you can go places with it. But yeah, I don't know if that would really work as well today. I think there's a lot more sort of noise of people trying to get seen, and it was just sort of a novel approach, and it worked. So.
I mean, it's still a very creative idea, though. And I mean, there's a million different content pieces out on the internet. There's a lot of very creative work out there, but that is still very unique. And yeah, it led to you being with HarperCollins. You have published how many novels now?
12 came out in December. 13, 14 will be out this year. 15, 16 out next year. So yeah, so it's been a lot of work and a lot of hustle, but I enjoy it.
That's one thing that struck me, is that you are incredibly prolific, and that might tie back into that original blog too. I mean, like you said, you were posting to it every day, basically. Do you find that is common, or is that just something that you feel uniquely blessed and gifted with, to be able to put out that much work and have it all maintain quality?
I think it depends. I think I've started doing a lot of like IP work for like Star Wars and Warcraft and some other stuff I can't talk about yet, but that's sort of like those jobs come to you more easily if you're fast and you can produce a lot, because the contracts tend to be very short. They tend to want a book within like 6 months. So if you can't sit down and write a book in 6 months, you shouldn't take those jobs, because it's very fast, it's very streamlined, it's collaborative. So I think that it's definitely a boon in that sense. And I think, it's just the way I work. I like to work fast. I don't like to sort of sit on something for like 3 years, because I sort of have like magpie syndrome where I get distracted by a shiny new idea. So I kind of have to like capitalize on the momentum and write it, in like two or 3 months and keep that energy going. And then I can finish it really fast. But yeah, I mean, I think it just depends. Like, I don't have a lot of sympathy for like George R.R. Martin and people like that. I think it's like a little bullshit, to be honest. Like, I write, well over 200,000 words a year, and I'm not saying I'm as good as him or anything. That's not the point. I'm saying like there does come a time when like your work ethic and your dedication kind of has to like, you kind of have to show up or not. But yeah, I think it's definitely a skill that you have to develop. You have to turn off a lot of the voices that tell you to edit as you go and things like that. But I will say too, like the older I get and the more I know about publishing, the more I know about telling stories and narrative design, like I will say I'm slowing down a lot, because I'm learning a lot about the craft and I'm taking a lot of that. And so it does make the process a little longer. But yeah, in general, I think it's just a preference. I think some people just like to take their time and there's nothing wrong with that. But I know for me, it's like if I don't do it fast and, and keep excited about it, that I kind of like lose the enthusiasm. So
You mentioned working on Star Wars. So one, what is that experience like? I mean, how is that different than working on with your own characters in your own universe?
sure, it's crazy. It's surreal. It's I did a short story for them in a certain point of view, which is like this big anthology that takes the A New Hope and sort of takes like side characters or lesser known characters, and you see like a scene from their perspective. So I haven't written a whole book for them or anything like approaching that, but even so, with like a short story, you're talking what 15, 20 pages, and the amount of oversight and detail and like this really rigorous sense of like this all has to be perfect, this all has to connect, it has to fit the canon, it has to fit what we want to do going forward. My story was set on Alderaan, and like I know, like I love Alderaan, and so I tried to be sly and like put in like these little things. I was like, oh, like I love this tiny detail about Alderaan, I'm going to sneak it in there for the fans, and they were like, no, you can't do that. Like we have plans for that, or you know what I mean? So even like on a small, like tiny fan servicey one sentence mention type stuff, they're really like, they really clamp down on that. So, but yeah, I mean, it was a good experience. It was delightful. I had a great editor. And it was wild to see, like, you open up the manuscript and it's like Pablo Hidalgo, like writing in the margins, and just these people that like you're sort of like, oh my God, this is like iconic. So yeah, it's crazy, and you feel like a lot of responsibility. Like, I'm a huge Star Wars nerd. It's like one of my favorite things in the world, and same with World of Warcraft. Like I've been a player for 15 years, so when you get to finally like put your spin on something, it's not only fun, but it's scary because you're like, okay, this is a lot of responsibility. I really care about this. I care about the fans. I'm not making any decisions rashly. I'm really thinking everything through. So in a lot of ways, it's much harder because you're not, if I kill off one of my characters, whatever, it's my character. Like I'm the one who came up with them. I'm like their mother, for lack of a better word. And these other characters, I'm working with Leia's parents. It's like, they're not mine. So you have to respect that person's vision, right? And respect the history that sort of comes along with it, but then also make sure that you're not losing yourself. I would never want to like amoeba into like just general Star Wars style, right? Like I still want it to be me. So you're working on, it's like, I've heard a lot of people be like, oh, you're writing fan fiction. It's like, not really, because there's a lot more at stake, and it's much more collaborative, and you're given really intense parameters, and there's goals. This is a brand, and they have goals, so it's a lot more intense than fan fiction, and a lot more like structured. So
well, and you're contributing to the canon of these stories that are incredibly important, like you said, to so many people. I mean, shit, yeah. I have 2 Star Wars tattoos on my body.
I have a sleeve. Like, it's a big deal. Yeah. And you're like, and it's so hard because you really want to please everybody. And, you do sort of put yourself in the crosshairs of a lot of internet criticism as soon as you step foot into that territory. People have a lot of opinions about their favorite fandoms, and I think there's I see a lot of commentary that's like, oh, they just don't care. Like Star Wars, Disney, they just don't care. Blizzard, they don't care. It's like, if you could see behind the scenes how much care goes into this stuff. Like, I'm sure there are decisions you don't like, or I'm sure there are mistakes now and then, but like, no, these people really, really, really care. And they hire people who really, really care. So, yeah, it's hard to sort of, you're privileged and you're blessed and you're very lucky to be working on this stuff. But I think people lose sight of the fact that like, no, it is people making it. Like, you know what I mean? We really do give a shit. We really care. So yeah, it's never, if you don't like it, it's not because we didn't care. It's because you just don't agree with what the direction went. But we definitely care. I'd like to make that very clear.
What are some of the things that really influenced you in your work, or are still influencing your work?
Sure. It's interesting. Like the older I get, I'm sort of like becoming much more hyper aware of that. Like I think when I was writing in my early 20s, I was just sort of like, whoa, like I wasn't as tapped into sort of what had formed me as a writer. And then now I've sort of been going back on this weird nostalgia dive through the books that I think like made me fall in love with books in the first place. And for me, that was like everything Jane Austen ever wrote. I'm a huge Jane Austen fan, which may seem like a weird influence given like that I write a lot of like horror and fantasy and sci-fi, but I think it is weirdly there if you look for it. I think it's especially in the way I structure like romances and love interests. And then this like weird book. God, I'm gonna forget the name now, but it's like this 80s 90s book, and it's this like really really ham-fisted feminist like sci-fi, but it's delightful. I don't know, like rereading it I was like, oh my god, I see it, like the way I write this, the word choices, the style, I'm like, this is like, if you squint, this is like very similar to how I write. So I was obsessed with that book. I think it's Cheryl, oh my god, Cheryl Kenyon, no, I'm going to butcher it. Anyway, so, and a lot of Anne Rice. I read a lot of Anne Rice in my formative years. So, yeah, I think there's like, if you sort of, I was obviously obsessed with Star Wars. Like, I think I saw The Mummy, the Brendan Fraser one, obviously, like 12 times in theaters when I was a child. So, like, weird things
That
like
is an
that. Where
underrated like, film.
It's phenomenal, okay? And I will defend it to my dying breath. I won't talk about the sequels, but the original is almost perfect. Yeah, so like that, and like The Fifth Element. I was obsessed with The Fifth Element and Dracula. And so I just like, I'm starting to see like, oh, like my career is starting to make more sense the more I sort of do this like autopsy on my childhood and all the influences, and I'm like, wow, I did horror, I did sci-fi, I'm doing fantasy now, like I'm kind of going on this like world tour of those influences now. But yeah, it was eclectic, it was a super eclectic mix because my mom was very classic literature, and then I had older brothers, and obviously they got me into like Dungeons and Dragons and a lot of more like sort of nerdy influences. So
that brings me to like something else that I think is a related question, but outside of your work, outside of literature, what do you like to do? What are the things that keep you occupied, and that you're passionate about?
Sure. My dogs, obviously, they're my life. They went to sleep. That's the first time. This is like unheard of. Every time I get on a podcast, they're like squeak, 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 like jumping across the camera. So we really lucked out. So my dogs, I'm a weightlifter. I power lift, which is a really great way to sort of get out of your head, like just to do something purely physical. I love to travel. I love to cook. Video games are a big part. I mean, I guess that's like now sort of tied into my work, but yeah, it's really nice to just like unplug and let someone else tell you a story for a while. Obviously, I read a lot. I'm really into being tattooed. That's a big hobby of mine. Yeah, I don't know. I think those are the big ones.
What are you reading right now?
Right now, I'm finishing up The Witches Are Coming by Lindy West. It is so recommendable. It is, I mean, I've like laughed and cried. It's fantastic. And also the Steel Crow Saga by, I think it's Paul Kruger, which is great fantasy. He's a really funny guy. He's very funny on Twitter too. Yeah, those are the two I'm on right now.
Very cool. Very cool. And, I honestly have so many questions I still want to ask you. So you've written in various genres. Is there anything specifically that you haven't done yet that you do want to do?
So I've technically done fantasy now because I've done 2 books for World of Warcraft, but I would really love to do my own fantasy in my own universe. So I think that'll definitely come eventually. That's like such a massive undertaking. That'll probably be a few years down the line. I'm actually right now, as soon as I finish up the 2 things I'm on contract for, I'm chipping away at my first like traditional romance novel. I am the biggest cheerleader for romance novels. I think they're delightful. And so I'm finally getting a crack at it, and I couldn't be more excited. It's like kind of the thing that gets me up out of bed every day, even though I can't work on it yet. So that'll be where I go. And I have this feeling like once I do one, I'll probably want to do a million. So that wouldn't surprise me. But I'd love to do. I really want to write a vampire novel. No one will ever let me do it because they're impossible. Like no one's taking them. They don't sell. I think I've pitched like 3 different vampire ideas at this point. It's just I have to give up. I have to give up on it. But yeah, so that's what I'd love to do. Fantasy, like a big sprawling, not Tolkien or whatever, but you know what I mean. Something fun.
Is there still like room for you? Like, let's say you've got this great vampire idea, you're in love with it, publisher doesn't want it. Could you go do another blog and start releasing it like that? I mean, is that something, or is that like a contract violation you'd get in trouble for?
Oh, I've seriously considered it. I mean, so I have like a million publishers, right? Because you're not like tied to them. You sort of, every book can go to a different publisher. But no, I could do that. I mean, I've seriously considered it many times, just doing it and sort of putting it up with a like pay what you think it's worth link, right? Like, hey, it's free if you want it to be free. I can't force you to pay for this, but like, it's not going to be edited very well. It won't have a fancy cover or anything, it'll be pretty bare bones. But like, yeah, I've considered just being like, this is putting it or like doing a Patreon or something and just being like, here, pay what you think it's worth. If you want to kick me 50 cents for this, cool, because at a certain point, like, I'm going to get to keep doing this as a job, hopefully forever. And then maybe I'll never get to do the vampire novel, but like, I wouldn't personally feel like I took a huge hit financially. You know what I mean? Like I would like to get paid for it, but like, if it just becomes that much of a like passion project, I think it kind of is worth it just to do it. And then who knows, maybe if it's popular enough, then it would transcend to traditional publishing, something like that. Kind of just relive my entry into
that was exactly my thought on it, was just prove them wrong. Just be like, look, this vampire business will work.
Tempting. I mean, it's hard. I get it. It's like, I feel I don't like to badmouth Twilight. I think that's really kind of tacky at this point, but like it did kill the vampire. Like it fucking killed the vampire industry for books. Like it's dead now. It's dead forever. Which is honestly kind of an accomplishment. Like if I wrote a book that literally killed off an entire subgenre, that is pretty amazing when you think about it. Like what an accomplishment. You stone cold murdered an entire genre of books.
Which is, I mean, and vampire lore is like so central to like our pop culture mythos. Mm-hmm. That like it can't be dead forever. Like it can't be married to Twilight for even another decade. Like there's just the right story is going to come along in the next 2-5 years, I feel like, and blow the thing back open, and everyone's going to be like, oh yeah, I loved Anne Rice and Buffy and Bela Lugosi and like everything affiliated with vampires in our modern context. Why not you?
Yeah. And I think too, like, I shouldn't say it's dead. Like, there are people putting out like paranormal romances and stuff. I think in the sense of it being like a cultural event, you know what I mean? I think that feeling of like, I think everybody's sort of like, we don't need your take on it right now. It's just sort of, it's overdone. And I thought by now that wouldn't be the case. I sort of was like, kind of like putting the feelers out a few months ago, and it was just like, no. That's not happening. It's like, wow, okay. Still, I'll check back in like 2 years. I'll check back. Maybe I'll just write it and have it ready to go. So the minute they open the gates, I just like got it.
You can just put it in, be the first one in the line.
Yeah, I mean, because to me, it's like I kind of don't care about the like science of it. Like this is, I get reamed for this with my zombie book too, where it's like this isn't scientific, and I'm like, this isn't about the fucking zombies. It's about the people, right? Like the characters are what makes a zombie book interesting to me, not the zombies. I could kind of give a shit about the zombies, but like that's how I feel about vampire books too, right? Like even if we all use the same mythology, aren't there a bajillion ways you can like make those characters work and introduce a new setting or a new context? I don't know. Yeah, to me it's very strange because it's like I think we're never going to see the end of certain like zombie books are still going, those are still happening. So yeah, I don't know. To me it's just strange that people are like, no, there's no more. It's like, okay. I guess because
Fine,
if publishing says, I guess I will not have my vampire book, but that's okay.
Yeah, I feel like it's hard to talk about books in modern context without talking about like movie and TV options. To branch off of the whole Twilight conversation, is that something that you're at all interested in? I mean, if someone came and said, "I really want to adapt, one of your series," would that be something you're open to? And if so, like what does that look like from your perspective?
So I can't really talk about some of it. Some things may sort of possibly. I mean, okay. So let me just say the chance of a book becoming a movie or a TV show is like 1% of a percent. I mean, it's a vanishing chance because even if you get through the phase of like, oh, someone bought the rights. Okay, now it's like now they have to find a writer, and now we have to find a showrunner, and now we have to like get that whole process going. And so I've kind of gone through that process like 3 or 4 times now where you get excited and you feel like something's happening and then it just dies or there's just really no appetite for it or whatever. And what I've learned now doing this so many times is it really is dependent on like the right person being passionate about it. So like I can't really drive it because I don't have the money. I'm not a producer. Someone else has to come to you with those things. But if you like kind of what's happening right now that I can't really talk about, I think the right person found it and they're really passionate about it and they do have the power and the money to potentially make something happen. So and it can look like a lot of different things. I've sold the rights to books where you're sort of hands off, right? You're just sort of like, here, take it. It's up to you now. You're going to hire I'll maybe ask for control of certain things or, like approval of certain things, but I wouldn't even really be involved in writing it because I'm not a TV movie writer necessarily. And then kind of what's happening now is more like I would be involved in more of a like co-writing kind of position, which is exciting and sort of being mentored through the process, that kind of thing. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's exciting, obviously, but for me, it's always like the goal is to get eyes back to the book, right? Like it's great and you're making something that is exciting and hopefully people love. But like for me, my motivation is always like, I want to hopefully bring them home to the book so that they can like rediscover that story, in its original form. So yeah. And, and like, it'll take you're always like, okay, well, it's good. Things are going to change and we're gonna have to like let go of certain things. And I'm pretty cool with that. There's very few things that I would be like picky about with my own books, but yeah, so it's exciting, but it's one of those things where I've learned to just be like, it's not going to happen. You know what I mean? Like if something happens, I'll be happily surprised. But I'm kind of like, I've now learned like, don't get attached to this because chances are it's going to fall through. So yeah, it is a possibility. It is potentially happening, but can't really talk about it. Sorry.
No, I mean, I love to hear that you have that type of opportunity possibly open for you again. So looking forward to whatever comes of it. We are getting to the end of the program, and I like to end all these by asking the same question, which is, throughout, your whole career and all the work you put out, but also through your personal life, what is the thing that you most want to convey to other people?
Ooh, my God. I wish you had warned me this is coming. It's
That's
like,
why I like to ask people that question.
yeah,
Well, I ask
okay.
everybody that question, and
Okay.
it fucks with you.
Um, I don't know. I think this is like feels extra weighty, right? Because of like what we're all going through. And I think what I've learned the most from dealing with my family right now and my friends right now is like tell people honestly how you feel about them. It matters a lot. You know what I mean? Like if you're holding something back from someone, don't do that because you don't know when something like this will happen. Like I didn't go home for Christmas this year. I just was overwhelmed with work. I couldn't find babysitters for the dogs, but I was like, it's fine, you know. And now every single day I'm like, why didn't I try harder? Why, you know, when am I going to see my parents again now? You know, like I don't know. It could be, it might not be till next Christmas, right? If that. So you know, telling people you love them, telling people how you honestly feel, and making that effort. Because you know, every day I regret not being like, well, I'll find I'm gonna look again for a babysitter for the dogs. I'm gonna try harder. You know, I'm gonna make it home. And yeah, so that's, I think that's what I'm taking away from this, is that like there might not be, you know, another chance to do it. So tell people that you love them.
I mean, I could not possibly agree more, and it's something we all need to hear, probably every moment of every day.
Yeah, especially
Thank you.
now. Call your parents. If tell them you love them.
Well, now I know what I'm doing for the next hour of
Yeah,
my day.
sorry.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Again, that is Madeleine Roux. Please look for her work, the Asylum series. And is there anything that you want to plug?
Yeah, go check out Salvaged. It's my latest book. It's a sci-fi, feminist kind of alien romp. It's got feelings. It's got action. It's pretty kick-ass. And then my first adult book with World of Warcraft will be out in July. So stoked about that.
Awesome. Thank you again so much, Madeleine.
Yeah, thank you.